The Kolob Canyon disaster. 1,000 feet deep into the earth is a narrow, flooded canyon running with freezing water. A group of explorers is faced with the stark reality of their situation. They're out of options. As the world grows colder around them and hope goes even slimmer, they have to come to terms with the fact that they took on a challenging weight greater than their skills could handle. Cold, afraid, and surrounded by death, they can only pray. This is the story of the Kolob Canyon disaster, a story divided into two chapters, negligence and overconfidence. First things first, let's meet our characters. A group of 5 Mormon teenagers wanted to make the rappel adventure down Kolob Canyon, eager to know the sights that awaited them below. They were guided by 3 men, Ellis, a 37-year-old explorer scout from the Mormon Church, and his fellow Mormonite Mark Brewer, 35. Leading the trio was David Fleischer, 27, who took the position of group leader despite not having enough experience to lead an expedition of this caliber, especially down the route they chose. Speaking of the route, let's discuss the place they chose to explore, Kolob Canyon. Kolob Canyon is part of the Zion Valley National Park and is a surreal place to explore. A 3-day hike was planned by the group to visit the narrow rock formations accompanying the flow of water that descended through the canyon in the springtime, and have a unique experience that only a place as grandiose and amazing as Kolob Canyon can provide. Lastly, there were the park officials who issued Fleischer a permit to undertake the adventure they'd planned. At this time of year, the water is usually running at a slow, controlled 5 cubic feet per second, generating a small stream, forming waterfalls along the route and creating pools of cold, clean water. Park officials cannot issue a permit for exploration when danger levels reach extreme under the park's rules. For the time Fleischer had originally planned the trip, June the 12th, their permit was denied and the trip was rescheduled for July the 14th, when the danger was marked only as high, meaning they could proceed with the trip as planned. David, Mark, and Kim guided the 5 teenagers down the route they'd chosen. After checking with park officials multiple times, David confirmed to his satisfaction that conditions were navigable, and the weather forecast for the next days was clear skies and 90-degree Fahrenheit, so they didn't have to worry about the flash flood that rainwater could cause in the canyon. Armed with backpacks, climbing gear, and enough provisions for 3 days, they went down Kolob Canyon. What they didn't expect, however, were the conditions they'd find on their descent. Kolob Canyon is downstream from Kolob Reservoir, a water reservoir managed by the Water District. In spring, the reservoir releases a slow stream of water down Kolob Canyon to form the pools and waterfalls that cavers and explorers so love. But on July the 14th, 1993, the water was running at an unreasonable 29 cubic feet per second. When they started the descent, the explorers didn't expect the water to be that much of a challenge, as they'd treated with park officials before starting the adventure and were assured that the conditions were navigable. However, as their descent went further and further, the water started factoring more and more into their calculations. They were expecting ankle-deep water at the most and slow crystalline pools of cold water for them to plunge into throughout their descent. They'd even come to the adventure wearing insulated clothing, knowing that they'd come in contact with cold water. But this wasn't the trickle they'd prepared for. The water was above their knees and roaring, a deafening cascade of freezing water that made it almost impossible to communicate clearly. Fleischer had checked the water level exhaustively with the park officials, so when they faced the water level down in the creek, Fleischer was furious. Once reality set in of the true nature of their descent, Fleischer went into a rage, calling the permit they'd gotten ludicrous. In this scenario, Fleischer knew that trying to ascend the canyon would be impossible. If the water was a challenge for them as they walked alongside it, trying to walk against it was a death wish. They'd exhaust themselves trying to reach the next toehold or trying to anchor their ropes to the next hook in the wall, and all the while they'd have the force of the water against them. Their only option was to go down into the darkness, into the water, down below the caves and chasms of Kolob Canyon, down where the waterfalls roared and whirlpools spun faster and faster, down into the mouth of the canyon, hoping they could make it to the other side. Trying to remain calm, Fleischer leads the group down the canyon. He knew that they'd be able to find dry ground ahead if they were able to navigate the waterfalls forming below them. Fleischer, being the more experienced of the leaders, went first. After him, the other 2 adults and the 5 teenagers followed. David tried his best to make sure that every one of their descents through the waterfalls was safe as it could be. On one of the waterfalls, the 8-feet drop led to a whirlpool that formed below them, a threatening sight, knowing that they had 5 teenagers along with them. So Fleischer thought of a strategy to get them across, maneuvering over the whirlpool. Fleischer would use himself as a sort of anchor so that the other men didn't have to swim through the whirlpool. Attaching his harness, David went ahead with his plan, but the waters were too strong for him. He was getting pulled. The whirlpool snared him, and his backpack slid from his back to start choking him. Unable to disconnect from his wrapped rope, weighed down by the waterfall above and being pulled by the whirlpool below, David was struggling to keep himself afloat. The teenagers, desperate, began yelling that Fleischer's backpack was choking him. Seeing this, Ellis leapt to get Fleischer free from the whirlpool, but on his way down, he banged his head on a rock and got sucked to the bottom. When Mark Brewer saw what happened to Ellis, he leapt behind him, stopped briefly to free Fleischer from the backpack's grip, and descending to fish Ellis from the waters. Ellis was brought to the nearest margin of the pool, and the 2 adults began performing CPR on him. They tried for 30 minutes to resuscitate Ellis, but to no avail. He was dead. The first of the teenagers to be lowered was Ellis's son. David and Mark allowed the boy a few minutes to mourn his father. They propped Ellis's body against a log to try to keep it out of the water. They went further down, maneuvering the 2nd and 3rd waterfalls on their path. When they came to the 4th waterfall, they'd only made 150 feet of downstream progress in 2 hours. At this point, they'd already lost 6 of their 8 backpacks and much of their rope. The fall they'd face next was the tallest they'd come across yet, with 15 feet of drop. To try and test the whirlpool below, Fleischer tied one of the backpacks to a rope and tossed it into the pool. The force of the whirlpool was too strong, however, and Fleischer could not recover the backpack by pulling the rope. At that moment, he made the biggest mistake of his life. Deciding he needed the backpack, he leapt into the whirlpool to surface it. Against all odds, he got it, and he started swimming toward the shore of the pool. But just as he was about to get out, the backpack slipped and the current sucked it under, and Fleischer along with it. The others looked down at the pool, waiting, hoping, praying that Fleischer would surface once more. He never did. At that point, Mark Brewer had to make a difficult choice: leap in and try to rescue Fleischer, or stay where they were, protect and orient the teenagers with him, and wait for help. In the end, he chose to stay with them. Fleischer is most likely dead, he told them, and if they leapt behind him, they risked the same fate. Pulling some rocks from the stream, Mark and the 5 teenagers built a small ledge where they could rest, taking turns to get out of the cold waters. When exhaustion got the better of them, they slept, piled on each other. And there they stood, praying and hoping for rescue, for 5 long days, surviving on a few oats and other foods they still had left. Helicopters flew overhead twice, but the passage was too narrow for them to be seen. They tried lighting fires, but in the damp cave, nothing would ignite. They tried with their last match to ignite a signal fire from one of the salvaged supplies. They lighted it, but in the narrow caves, no one saw. They hoped that someone would notice that they were overdue, and a search party would be sent to help them. On the 5th day, as hope grew slimmest and food was all but gone, a miraculous piece of rope dropped next to them. Salvation. The local search party, led by the Zion National Park team and the local sheriff's office, had finally found them. The 6 people trapped in Kolob Canyon were rescued. Ellis's body was also recovered. Fleischer's body wouldn't be located for another 11 days. It's hard to place blame on one or the other party in the incident. A lot has to go wrong for something so terrible to happen. The incident ignited a conversation between the Zion Park community about the safety procedures and the issuing of permits to explorers going through the park. At the very least, the tragedy of Kolob Canyon should serve as a stark warning. Never underestimate the power and the danger of nature. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments section down below. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, dive deeply into the like and subscribe buttons. Let us know what you thought of it in the comments. See you again soon in another video, if you dare.